Hey everyone, it's May. Welcome to another episode of The May Lee Show. Thanks for being here. It is May still, the month of May, I mean, and that means it's still Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, so celebrating all month long. In this episode, I really wanted to focus on something very specific because we have midterm elections coming up, and you know there's lots of talk about who's running and the various issues on the table. And, you know, voting matters, right? We see what happens when people don't vote. We see what happens when there's great division and a lot of partisanship, which, I mean, that goes without saying, right, in politics. But here's the important thing when it comes to the AAPI community, and that is there aren't enough of us in office on the local, state, federal level. And let me share some findings of a group called the New American Leaders Organization. And here are just a couple of findings. Not one single state government in America has Asian, Pacific Islander, and Latino representation proportionate to its population. Not one single state. That's not surprising to me, actually. Here's another one. New Americans, and that they mean immigrants, people of color who are, from a different country here in America. So new Americans are 26% of the U.S. population, but hold only 3.5% of state legislative seats. Okay, so that's pretty paltry. And then finally, the U.S. population is 18.5% Latino, 13% Black, 6% AAPI, and 3% multiracial. Congress is still 74% white and 73% male. Damn, those are not good numbers, right? So clearly there is a total imbalance when it comes to representation in politics. We kind of know this, right? We all know this. But why is that important? Well, maybe you already know this, but I'm going to reiterate. It's important because if we don't have that kind of political representation on all levels, then our voices aren't being heard. Then policies won't be made that cater to different communities that have a voice. So therefore, when we don't have that political representation and we don't take advantage of the fact that we have to exercise our right to vote, there go my dogs. I bet they're chasing some squirrels. Anyway, I'll move on. I'll keep going. When we don't have that kind of say and that political representation, then we're constantly going to be dismissed and ignored and invisibilized. So representation on all fronts, of course, matters. In media, in entertainment, things like that. Politics, well, that's where laws are made. That's where decisions are made about schools, school board, city, council members. They make decisions about where you live. So it does matter. And when we don't have that AANHPI representation, then that's a problem, right? As our numbers are growing, remember, we're the fastest growing ethnic population in the country, and we're the fastest growing voting bloc in the country, and yet we don't have that political representation in office. That's a problem, okay? So I wanted to talk to some people who are trying to shape new leaders, new Asian leaders, to run for different types of office. And so they do training programs and try to really kind of help give that support system to people who are thinking about running or have already run but need more support. And so the New American Leaders Organization does just that. And they just did a training program for AANHPI women who are interested in running for office of some kind. And so I had a chance to speak with the COO of NAL, Sara Le Brusq, to kind of find out like what their process is and what sort of, the temperature is of, politics and Asian Americans, particularly women, wanting to run for office. What's their motivation? What's their inspiration? So here's that interview, and I'll come back on the other side to introduce somebody else. Hi, Sara. How are you? Good to have you here.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, I think this is such an important issue to talk about, just given the state of our sort of politics and representation and lack thereof. So yes. I know that New American Leaders is certainly an organization that tries to promote more diversity and more representation in politics, right?
Yes.
So tell me first the state of affairs. I know that you guys do a bunch of different surveys in terms of doing literally like head counts of how many people are, in Congress and on the state level and, federal level. So tell me how we're doing. I can guess what the answer is.
We're growing in certain ways. When we look at the AAPI communities, which have been documented for a while, we're still at about 1% of legislators at all levels, when we should be around 7 to 8% based on population. And when we look within that group, the women representation is more dire. We put out a state of representation report on the state legislator level. And the last one that we put out showed that just a third of those are women. And so for the fastest growing, group and voting block, it's so important to see yourself in these positions in order to see what's possible. And, always what we find is people who have these lived experiences that can lend themselves to the policy making that's going to impact your communities are so needed. So when we see that dearth of representation, it has a lot of implications.
Right. So in terms of your mission, you're obviously trying to push for better representation, which though has to start with people wanting to run for office. And
yes, or being convinced.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is becoming an even bigger barrier these days because of, what politics is starting to represent or has been representing for a while. It's ugly,
Right.
It can get really ugly, and people don't want to jump into that sort of arena and get slaughtered. I mean, really, I think that's why a lot of people don't want to run for office. They don't want to deal with all of that. So how do you convince people to even consider it?
Well, you're absolutely right. When you think about serving in public office, it shouldn't be such a difficult decision. It shouldn't be such a sacrifice. I think a lot of people in our communities get involved not because they think this is a great job. It's a calling. They're being brought out of aggravation, out of fear, sometimes out of anger. And it is difficult to finally make that decision to run. That's why New American Leaders exists. We bring people in. We don't say you have to commit to something. Say, learn about the process, learn about the different possibilities for civic engagement. It's not just candidates. There's a whole political ecosystem that you can be supporting. You could work on a campaign. One of the most important pieces about people who are staffing campaigns is that they're often staffing administrations. And so we don't have that level, which also New American Leaders trains. Then we're going to see the same piece that's missing those voices in policymaking. It's not just the legislator that's helping to make these decisions. It's a lot of research and putting attention on policies and policy decisions that are, going to affect people in certain ways. So bringing people into a safe space, in this most recent training for the AANHPI in particular, it was saying, there is such a power in the coalition building. And so as part of this training, we're going to teach you how to build that voting base and how to reach out to other communities. But there's going to be a sanctity in some of the other aspects of the training where you're really looking into your own identity and what is going to motivate you to be involved, because that's what's going to resonate with your voters. So it's building that, saying that there's also a network out there in addition to New American Leaders. Once you get into this pipeline, and there's different entry points, it's not only in this early recruitment phase, but we also let people, bring people in after they've decided to run, and maybe they hadn't come through an early pipeline training, but we have a political arm so they can come in through that way and get endorsements and support that way.
You mentioned before about the idea of getting in touch with identity, and that's an important factor in sometimes people wanting to run because they feel like they're not represented and they want to represent that identity. And for Asians, clearly, we have felt that we have been erased or invisibilized for so long, and even our own history is not being taught properly. And that's my big thing. So is that something that you're seeing motivate more people wanting to run for office? That sort of declaration of saying, we're here, we want to be seen, we want to be heard, and therefore we want to be represented. Is that something that's driving people to run?
Yes, absolutely. It is, this piece that, oh, I've seen someone like B. Wynn in Georgia, who's now running for Secretary of State. What an important position. And, just a stalwart for all of the voter access that we need. We've seen people like Shekhar Krishnan and Shahana Hanif, who were the first Southeast Asians in part of the New York City Council. Like these little advances where people are seeing themselves, okay, they look like me, they sound like me, they're making policies that resonate with me. It is drawing out a certain people. We still have to contend with the other piece, this rise in Asian American hate. Yeah. It is real. And so it is not only in convincing people to become a part of this process, but in the attrition rates. We've made some gains in certain places, but then having that support so that people will stay in those positions has been difficult as well.
Oh, so wait. Let me ask you about that, Sarah. So you're seeing people drop out and not stay in?
Okay. Yes. Mm-hmm. And it's not only the Asian American community, but it's and sometimes a thankless position. We have, on the level of school board, that has come for how much hate have we seen around school board decisions? Some things that don't even line up, but they're being blamed for things and attacked for things. Yeah. And so it's hard to convince someone that says, I'm afraid for my family. We even are seeing, in these, in pieces in the voting administration for election administrators, these jobs where people are coming out and they're regulating some of the, the voting booths, they're getting attacked. So all of this is real. It's not easy to contend with, but it's having these networks and having more. It's not invisibilizing it is the other piece. Making sure that people are aware. I went to part of the training this weekend, and I said, we want to encourage you in all the best ways, and give you the confidence and the skills in order to run. We also want to make sure that you have the real understanding of what you're facing, so you're not getting into anything, you're prepared. So let's talk about the concerns. And there was a lot of identity concerns that came out in those spaces. We thought, very typical response in general is that I don't have a big fundraising base. Yeah. So that's there, but that wasn't the biggest concern. It was more things like, my motivation stems from some of my family history, and I don't think my family wants me to talk about that. So how can I be authentic? We teach about authenticity. How can I be authentic? And so we kind of workshop some of those pieces. Or, in my family, my husband also has political ambitions, and they don't know exactly what I'm doing here right now. So it's really illuminating. They always are, but I think in this space in particular, we learned a lot. This is a pilot program. And so, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Let's go back to the idea of, obviously, you're trying to encourage more women and Asian American women to run for office. And that's something that I think there is a reluctance. Like you said, there's some cultural issues, family issues. And then the idea of, I know that you guys talk about this on your website, sort of imposter syndrome that a lot of people deal with, especially women. We do tend to question ourselves much more so than men sometimes. And wonder if we're really qualified. And so that, I'm sure, is a barrier to entry too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is one training, right? And so you're going to say, we do some pre-survey and post to say, how much more ready do you feel in certain areas? Like, are you ready to go out? And it was from some of those learnings that we said, we can't have just a training. We have to be holding hands in some ways until you get to what we call a smart yes. So post a training, you are assigned a coach. And we have coaches all across the AANHPI backgrounds that we have, we'll start selecting who's going to be paired up with which coach. So you can get even more granular as you think about some of the aspects of your particular race. What makes most sense for you? What's been motivating you? And is there going to be an open seat? We also don't say that you have to pick a race this year. We're going to be with you. And so let's think about the long game. So you have a coach, you have continued webinars, and it's The imposter syndrome is there, but we think that the more that we can reach out, because we continue to reach out to all of our participants, they're in alumni groups, they maintain those connections. That's, I think that's the best that we're doing, and we do have a lot of people who run in the end.
Yeah, yeah. So are the numbers encouraging to you, or are you still seeing that there's just not enough participation or interest, or again, reluctance? Yeah.
But the numbers are encouraging. Yeah. Seeing a lot more youth coming out earlier with an interest in running. And so in some cases, it's setting those expectations where, people come through and they say, I'm ready for Congress. And okay. So again, that smart yes is what I'm talking about, that we try to say, okay, first, have you volunteered on campaigns? Like, how active are you in your community? You need to get your name out there. You have such leadership qualities, but there's some groundwork that needs to be done too. So we really do try to temper expectations, but we have seen a lot more enthusiasm in youth. And, we're going to keep chipping away at it. I think that some of the topics that we mentioned already are preventing people as well that maybe had thought about it. So I don't have, exactly our conversion rate for this year, but it does look promising.
Well, let's talk about the elephant in the room, because there's several. One of them being the controversy over Roe v. Wade. Yes. And that's obviously something that women in particular are very interested in, whatever side of the argument you're on. But it seems that the majority of Americans that are polled don't support Roe v. Wade being overturned. And so is that also something that is pushing more people, especially women, into running, because they see what's happening to our constitutional rights, and who knows what will then, it's a slippery slope after that, right? So what are you hearing about that?
Yes, I think we will see some motivation around Roe v. Wade. I mean, we saw things. It's starting with the Women's March. We see that there's and it was that kind of the broader movement, that then led to putting yourself in more leadership positions. Yeah. I don't think that it's exact conversion. I really care about something. Okay, I'm going to run for office. There has to be some of those pieces where people are reaching out and saying, you're a leader in the community, and so you should think about this. Here's some options for getting some training for getting involved in this way. So I think that we will see more people come out with that. As you said, like, we are a nonpartisan organization, so we don't push people in any direction, but we definitely foster people to be true to, their issues that are motivating them. And so it's, I heard several things even this weekend, that's something that's makes the push even more urgent. Right. Another piece, though, that I think should be mentioned is that when we talk about a lot more young people getting involved, it's often not about the I don't want this, so I'm going to get involved. There needs to be like a more hopeful message often when you're trying to bring out people. That's true. We've heard with Trump, oh, this is going to be the greatest political motivator we've ever seen. And that wasn't what was drawing people out. There has to be a more hopeful message. So one is, stand up, fight back. Let's join all those rallies, and let's encourage people who are, leading those rallies to then get involved in this way. But there has to be a hopeful message as well.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point to make, because if we don't have any hope, then what's the point, right? Then that's what would deter people from even running. They'd be like, I can't make a difference, which I think a lot of people do feel. Right, when they see how politics is operating, there's such division and just getting nowhere. So I think a lot of folks feel like, I'm not going to make a difference even getting there, because my hands will be tied because I see what's happening in Congress. Nothing gets done, right? So you have that negative reinforcement for a lot of people who.
Yeah, and I just do want to mention as well, though, so much of this is happening at the state level, right? And so this case was brought to the Supreme Court after it started at the state level. Right. And so it's like putting even more of an emphasis on our local legislators, state and local.
Very true.
Be growing that base. We need people in that pipeline. And then who are the people that will end up in Congress? It's people who have been in that pipeline from our state and local base. So New American Leaders, we've always focused on it, knowing that that's the important piece. That's an entry point. And it's so all of these fights on the state level, then they rise up to the federal.
Right. One final question then, when it comes to the partisanship and the division in this country, I know that you guys are a nonpartisan group, and you should remain that way. But I wonder, though, it's becoming so divided.
Right.
And
Yeah.
sometimes it's pretty black and white. You know, it's not politics. It's like right or wrong.
Yes.
You know what I mean? That's where, yeah, yeah. So I wonder, that must be kind of a struggle for you guys when you're trying to stay nonpartisan.
Exactly. We don't promote certain sides of an aisle when we, provide our trainings and our curriculum. But we do promote access to all democracy access and everything that entails. We also promote immigrant justice. As an organization that promotes first and second generation Americans to get involved in politics, we clearly are looking for certain aspects around immigrant justice. And because of this polarization, it didn't start out that way. It's been around for 11 years, that it was more forgiving for both sides of the aisle. But because of these polarizing issues, right, we see a lot more participation from progressives coming through our programs. And because it's a safe space, we accept a lot of people that have those progressive values, because it's a room where we need people to feel comfortable and, can be as vulnerable as they want in order to get to that authenticity. And so, it plays out in a certain way that our circles tend to be very progressive.
Yeah. Well, we certainly need to shape new leaders like you guys are trying to do, and those that can hopefully make a difference with their integrity intact. I think that's the most important thing, right? But I appreciate the work that you guys are doing, and thank you so much for your time. And good luck with the midterms coming up. I think that's kind of a big deal, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Anyone watching or listening, come out. We have all sorts of programs that you can be involved in. We have lots of volunteer opportunities and many other things, or attend a training. And thanks for bringing light to the organization and some of the issues that we're working with.
Yeah, you're so welcome. All right. Thank you. Sara Le Brusq, CEO of New American Leaders. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
So I asked the organization, New American Leaders, if they could put me in touch with someone who had gone through their training program. And because I really wanted to meet somebody who actually was considering running for some sort of office as an AANHPI woman. So they put me in touch with a woman by the name of Celina Tupou-Fulivai. And she is Pacific Islander, lives in Tacoma, Washington. So I had a chance to speak with her and ask her, why she's interested in possibly running for some sort of office. So here's that interview, and I will see you on the other side. Hi, Celina. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing great. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, I am so excited to speak to you because you have just gone through this training program with NAL. And I always am curious as to what motivates somebody to want to go, run for a public office or, get into politics of any kind, just given, especially now, the nature of what's happening in our world. So first tell me, what's your background? Have you ever run for office or have you ever been involved in politics?
Never have been involved in politics. Definitely have done a lot of grassroots community organizing, things of that nature. But this is sort of my first step into the kiddie pool of politics. So it should be interesting.
So what is motivating you to do this now?
Honestly, I think it's sort of a personal mission at this point. There is a huge sort of lack of representation, specifically of the Pacific Islander community. And I think for a long time, I sort of waited for someone out there to model what this looks like for me. And it got to the point now where I'm in my 30s and I'm like, well, I guess what it looks like is me. And and so that is kind of what got me into it. And just to kind of be a role model too for other Tongan American women. We're a very sort of small and more marginalized group. And I just wanted to sort of add to the representation pool, and implement change in my community.
I love that, Celina, because you're right. When it comes to the Pacific Islander community, especially, and you're saying, your background is from Tonga, and that's, most people wouldn't even be able to find that on a map, right? And know about your culture or your background or your heritage. So it's great to see someone like you wanting to have a voice and represent, as small as your community might be, but it's important, right?
Right. Absolutely important. I don't think like a democracy is really a democracy without sort of having diverse voices in it. So, yeah.
Well, are there particular issues, and before, then we're going to talk about the training that you just went through and what that was like, but are there some particular issues that drove you even more, that motivated you even more to consider this?
Yeah, definitely sort of a personal connection just with my family and my community. And unfortunately for Pacific Islanders, data collection is sort of few and far between. So a lot of times it's us in the community that kind of have to identify what a lot of those issues are.
Right.
The Pacific Islander community, Tongan specifically, there's a lot of things that we suffer with, and we suffer in quiet. Things like immigration and just overall access to social services, language translation, things like that.
Right, right. Yeah, I look at a lot of the data and the surveys that come out, and when it comes to Pacific Islanders, when they're included, right, and that's when,
Right.
it does show a pretty big disparity in a lot of different areas, including education and income disparity and things like that people are just really not aware of. So I'm sure those are things that you care about.
Yes, absolutely. I think it was most evident really within the pandemic,
Yeah.
just sort of the disproportionate rate that we were, dying, and not having the data to sort of substantiate it to get funding.
Yeah.
Yeah, those things were really hard when we're having several people in our community die. So it kind of gave me a more of a nudge to get involved and
Yeah,
have
I think these are issues that the AANHPI community have been trying to raise, right? The fact that we've been invisibilized for so long and we're not even included in some general reports, right? They kind of stop at Black and Latinx, and then they kind of don't include the Asian community at all. So it's all the more important that you get up there and use that platform. Okay, so let's talk about the training that you just went through.
Sure.
So this was specifically for women of color, I think Asian women, right? Or was it women? Yeah, okay. So Asian women wanting to possibly run for office of some kind, whether that be on the local level or higher. So tell me what that was like for you and what you took away from that training.
Yeah, it was the way that I would describe it most. It was amazing and very empowering because I think just while AANHPIs, represents a very sort of vast and diverse group of people, one thing I know that we all have in common is that these institutions aren't made for us, and often we suffer from imposter syndrome. I know that I do for sure.
That's
Yeah.
Yep.
So to share space with other women that have the same struggles as me, right, also part of a marginalized community, and have the ability to sort of ask questions and just see really how does this work? What does this look like? What is a case study? Those type of things. It was a really beautiful sort of bonding moment that we all went through. We cried, we laughed.
Oh, wow.
The days were intensive, but there is nothing like that I've ever experienced in my life. And so it really gave me a sort of a sense of a community.
I bet that was empowering, because to get a room full of fellow AANHPI women who are interested in serving, right, in some capacity,
Right.
and then to be able to be vulnerable in terms of what your fears are, including imposter syndrome. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's something that people have to realize that so many of us suffer from, right?
Yes.
And so we question and have a lot of self-doubt, particularly because we've been programmed by society to feel this way about ourselves. Right?
Exactly.
So tell me more about how you've kind of had to deal with that and what has helped you get through that, or maybe you're still going through it, but tell me that process.
I go through it often, even just being transparent, coming to this interview with you.
Yeah.
I really asked myself, why me? Out of all the people that were there that were super well-spoken, that are from more traditional sort of backgrounds in the sense of academia and all these things, why did they pick me? But I also see the value in, having a voice, and everybody, should have the right to sort of speak out and talk about what their issues are. And the way that I combat it is, I guess I just sort of face it head on.
Yeah.
I just show up. Every time I show up, I'm just sort of amazed at some of the interactions that I get from, especially if I see another Pacific Islander.
Yeah.
There was one other one, actually two other ones at the training. and I wore a cultural sort of garment, and she saw me and she ran over and she gave me a hug.
Oh.
And it's those kind of moments, because we seldom, see each other in those spaces, that kind of propel me to keep going.
Right, right. Well, Celina, I'll tell you something. I can already tell the reason why you were chosen, but also the reason why I think people want you to lead, perhaps, is because you're real, right? Our world is too full of phonies and people who put on a facade and try to put on this act, especially in light of social media, right? Everybody wants to present themselves in a certain way, but the realness and the authenticity is what we need more of when people are serving in public office, right? We're lacking that, and that's why we're having so many issues. So you're bringing realness to it, so be proud of that. I think that's that's a superpower, right? Authenticity, vulnerability, things like that. And I love hearing that women were connecting on that level as well in this training.
Yes.
I got to ask though, how does your family feel, your community? I mean, I bet some are saying, are you insane?
I think honestly, because so seldom do we sort of get to see our women in these spaces. Not only that, but I always make it a point too, when I show up to these sort of events, to wear some sort of cultural attire. I think it's representation, right? And it's really exciting. It's really special. And my community has really sort of rallied around me. They've prayed for me to be here. And, I even had one gentleman, he texted me while I was in New York, do you need any money for anything? Because that's kind of how the Polynesian community sort of kicks in, they'll help out with any, are you sure you don't need anything? I'm like, I'm okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. So I know that they're really excited. I'm really excited to be there for them. But even more so, I'm more excited to see what the next generation of young women looks like after this.
Yeah. I didn't even ask the obvious question. What office are you running for? What position?
So I haven't committed to running for a position quite yet, but I'm looking at city council. I'm located in Tacoma, Washington.
Okay.
And I don't think a Pacific Islander woman has ever served on the city council. Yeah. So, and there has been quite an increase of us here sort of in this region. So I think it's about time.
No. City council is definitely a great way to start because, it's the local community. And then you kind of build from that if you want to move forward in your political career. But no commitment yet. Okay, got it. In terms of, I always wonder when people choose to finally run for any kind of office, right? Because again, I'm going back to the idea that in this day and age, politics is so divisive. Even school board, right? People are getting threatened at their school board meetings, right? As school board members. So do you have concern about the divisiveness and how it could affect you personally? I think a lot of people have the fear of, wow, are they going to come after me personally, my family, my background, all that stuff that has become, sort of dirty. It's become dirtier. Let's be honest, right?
Sure. The world is a really sort of ugly place right now, especially the past couple of years. Do I have fears of that? I think it's natural to have fears, but at the same time, I don't really. What you see is what you get with me. Also, the region that I lived in, it's a very diverse community. For instance, my husband, he's an African American school principal, high school principal. And so, with that, I feel like just how I sort of connect with the community is different, is authentic. Mm-hmm. And so if anybody attacks me on a personal level, I think that sort of speaks more to them than it does me.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And here's the thing. I think we need more people, especially in public office, who have had a lived experience, who are bringing that to the table. Like you're saying, you're, Pacific Islander, your husband is African American. So you have this experience of moving in the world, in that environment, right? And having that lived experience. So bringing that to the table is so valuable. And again, it's the representation and the voices that we need.
For sure. And for that, really, honestly, I credit my ancestors. We were some of the first sort of people to navigate the seas and the world, right? Wayfinders. And that's really like a testament to sort of how I've lived my life. It's just been wayfinding and navigating, because I can tell you what, me sitting here in front of you, I would not have believed that I would have done that had it been 12 years ago. I was a single mother, just coming out of a domestic violence relationship, living at a shelter, right?
Wow.
So there's been a lot of sort of things that I've sort of had to navigate when we talk about lived experience. And I think that's also kind of what humbles me, but also connects me too with sort of the community, is I understand what that's like, and also what it takes to pull yourself out of it.
Yeah, no, I think, wow, I don't know how much you want to get into that, but your experience of having been in a domestic violence situation, living in a shelter, as a single mom, that is multi-layered. And that makes you a lot stronger, but a lot wiser too.
Yeah, there for sure was a lot of trauma there, but I think it's that trauma also that sort of motivated me and also gives me the connection to other people that are going through something similar. Yeah. And so I do pride myself in being fairly open-minded, just because I'm like, hey, there's not really anything that you can say, that I haven't already been through. So that's kind of what keeps me level-headed.
Well, I love hearing that, because I think empathy is so super important, and you can't really have empathy oftentimes if you haven't, experienced it yourself. And so you having gone through all that, you can have that connection with people who have similar experiences. Unlike, and this is where I get very real, unlike a bunch of old white guys in office who, and a lot of them very wealthy, who have no understanding of what it's like to walk in the shoes of someone of color, or a single mom, or an abuse victim. All of these things are like, if our politics continue to be controlled by those voices, rather than the reflection of what America is, right? The good, the bad, and the ugly, but still bringing all those voices to the table, then nothing's ever going to change. So I'm sure that's probably a motivating factor for you too.
100% totally agree with you. And that is why it's so important, specifically for the AANHPI community, to be civically engaged. I feel like we sort of have this natural attunement to what it means to be marginalized, right? Not just within our own communities, but also just, being advocates to other communities, and seeing sort of what their struggles are. So that's why I'm really sort of excited just to get out there. Not only that, but to inspire other people to kind of follow suit.
Yeah. Well, Celina, I hope that you, for all of our sakes, I do hope you run for city council or some other office, because I love what I'm hearing, and I love the authenticity of your story and who you are. And so please keep me posted on what you decide.
Sure, I will for sure.
Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing a part of you with me and my listeners and viewers, because I think it's really important to hear normal people, from our community talk about why they're motivated in a truly genuine way, rather than all these falsehoods. And again, like I said, all these facades that people try to put up. No fronts, just the realness. This is what we want.
I appreciate that. We actually had to give stump speeches, and I really sort of struggled with that. But in my stump speech, that was part of kind of what I talked about too, is I'm not your typical candidate. I'm not looking for sort of a political career. Really what I want is just to implement change in my community. And it really just starts with doing it.
Well, we need more people like you, seriously, because we're in trouble right now in politics. But if more people like you choose to serve, maybe we can move that needle, right? So thank you, Celina. Good luck to you. But I will definitely want to keep in touch with you to see how you progress.
Alrighty. Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
You're so welcome. Celina and I kept on talking after we stopped recording the interview, and she was so thankful for me even highlighting the subject, right? And then talking to her, because she just was like, as you saw during the interview, she was like, I'm not sure why you're talking to me, but did she say that in the interview? Maybe not. Maybe she said that before. But anyway, she reiterated that, thinking that, sometimes she questions what value she has and if she's worthy. And I stopped her right there and I said, you are absolutely worthy. Don't ever think you don't have value and you don't bring value to the table, because you do. Too many women, especially too many women of color, undervalue themselves, think they're not worthy, think they're not deserving. And so I stopped her right there saying, you need to value yourself and know that and embrace that. And because of her realness and her authenticity, that's why people are going to be drawn to her, like I was. I was so drawn to her truth and just being who she is and being proud of who she is and her identity and her heritage and wanting to bring that to the table and wanting to bring that to her community so that she could enhance her community in that way. So that's the important thing when it comes to representation, to bring those diverse voices to the political arena and to other, to other areas in our lives so that people do become more aware, more educated, more informed. And then we build that better level of understanding. But Celina and all women out there, I say to you, don't feel like you're an imposter. Don't feel like you don't have value. Don't feel like you don't have worth, because we all do. So find that value, find that voice, and use it in whatever capacity you can, but don't let anyone tell you that you're not worthy. All right? So I just hope that, Celina moves forward with whatever decision she makes. No pressure, Celina. But I hope that this was educational to all of you guys, and it inspired you to think about how we can serve in different ways, right? And let's get out there and vote, because it matters. All right. Take care, everyone.